She hadn't called in 3 months. Not when I recovered from pneumonia. Not when I sent her daughter's college tuition payment. Not when my 70th birthday came and went without so much as a text message. But there she was on my caller ID, her name glowing on a Tuesday afternoon. Margaret. My only child, who had once been the center of my universe. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stared at the phone, debating whether to answer. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from my late wife's parents, still keeping perfect time after 47 years. Outside, autumn leaves skittered across my front lawn, the maples turning that particular shade of red that Catherine always said looked like God had dipped each leaf in wine. I missed her most in October. Dad? Margaret's voice came through before I'd even realized I'd answered. Are you there? I'm here, I said, settling into my armchair by the window. The leather creaked beneath me, worn from years of evening reads and morning coffees. How are you, Margaret? Fine, fine, she said, her voice carrying that artificial brightness I'd come to recognize over the years. The tone that meant she needed something. Just busy with work, you know how it is. The firm's been crazy. I did know. Margaret had been a corporate attorney for 15 years, climbing the ranks with the same determination she'd once applied to scaling the oak tree in our backyard. Back then, I'd been the one standing below, arms outstretched, ready to catch her if she fell. These days, I wasn't sure she even remembered I was there. And how's Emma? I asked about my granddaughter, the straight-A student who had my Catherine's eyes and Margaret's ambition. She's good. Actually, that's kind of why I'm calling. There it was. The reason for breaking 3 months of silence. Emma got accepted into that study abroad program in London, Margaret continued. The prestigious one I mentioned last year? It's a huge opportunity, Dad. Future employers look at this experience. It could make her entire career. I nodded, forgetting she couldn't see me. That's wonderful. Tell her congratulations from me. The thing is, Margaret's voice shifted, that slight hesitation I knew so well, the program costs more than we anticipated. With the housing in central London, plus the course fees, insurance, meals. I closed my eyes, suddenly feeling every one of my 70 years. 3 months of silence, including on my milestone birthday, and now she wanted money. The realization shouldn't have stung as much as it did. How much is it, Margaret? She paused, then said it all in one breath, $20,000. But it's an investment in her future, Dad. This is the kind of opportunity that opens doors. $20,000. The same amount I'd been planning to use for long overdue renovations on this old house. The roof had started leaking in the guest bedroom, and the kitchen appliances were older than Margaret herself. But those were just things. Emma was my only granddaughter. When do you need it by? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Well, that's the thing. The deposit is due next week. I know it's short notice, but we just found out she was accepted off the wait list. If we'd known sooner, I understand, I said, though part of me wondered if she'd actually just found out or if she'd been debating for days about calling me. So you'll help? The relief in her voice was palpable, as if she'd never doubted I would say yes. And historically, she'd have been right. I'd never refused her anything, not really. Let me think about it, I said, surprising both of us. Think about it? Her voice sharpened. Dad, this isn't just some frivolous expense. This is Emma's education we're talking about. Her future. I'm aware of that, Margaret. I kept my voice even, though my heart had started to beat faster. But $20,000 is significant. I need to look at my finances and make sure I can manage it. But she stopped herself, but I knew what she'd been about to say. You're retired. You're just sitting on your money. You don't need it for anything important. I'll call you tomorrow, I promised. After I've had a chance to review my accounts. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Fine, she finally said. I'll wait for your call. After we hung up, I sat in my chair watching the shadows lengthen across the yard. The maple tree Catherine and I had planted the day we brought Margaret home from the hospital now towered above the house, its leaves a brilliant crimson against the blue October sky. I pulled out my wallet, removing the small, worn photo I'd carried for decades. Catherine held newborn Margaret, her face radiant with exhaustion and joy. I stood beside them, one hand on my wife's shoulder, looking at our daughter with such wonder it still caught my breath 45 years later. We had been so young, so full of dreams for our little family. Catherine had been gone for 8 years now. Cancer took her swiftly, barely 6 months between diagnosis and the end. Margaret had flown in twice during those months, once after the diagnosis and again for the funeral. Emma had stayed longer, sitting by her grandmother's bedside, reading to her when Catherine grew too weak to hold a book. After the funeral, Margaret had suggested I sell the house. It's too big for just you, Dad. And the maintenance will become a burden as you get older. But I couldn't leave the home where Catherine's laughter still echoed in my memory, where the height chart on the kitchen doorframe tracked Margaret's growth from toddler to teenager, where the garden still bloomed with Catherine's favorite dahlias each summer. So I stayed, and Margaret returned to her busy life in Chicago, 500 miles and an increasingly vast emotional distance away. I made my way to the study, where neat files contained all my financial information. Catherine had always teased me about my methodical record-keeping, but she'd appreciated it too. My accountant husband, she'd called me, with affection rather than mockery. My retirement fund was healthy but not excessive. I'd worked 40 years as a CPA at a mid-sized firm, saved diligently, invested conservatively. The house was paid off, which was a blessing. But there were property taxes, utilities, health insurance premiums that seemed to climb each year, and the various maintenance costs of a house built in 1962. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I could give Margaret the money. But something held me back, not just financial prudence, but a deeper hesitation. When was the last time Margaret had called just to check on me? When had she last remembered a birthday or holiday without a reminder from Emma? The realization settled in my chest like a cold weight. I had become an ATM to my own daughter. The grandfather clock chimed 9, startling me from my thoughts. I closed the file and headed to the kitchen. The birthday card Emma had sent me sat on the refrigerator, held up by a magnet from Yellowstone, where Catherine and I had celebrated our 30th anniversary. Happy 70th, Grandpa. Love you lots. Emma had written in her neat handwriting, adding a drawing of a birthday cake with uneven candles. Margaret's name was signed below, clearly added in the same pen as Emma's note, an afterthought when my granddaughter had probably asked, "Did you sign Grandpa's card, Mom?" I made myself a simple dinner, baked chicken, steamed broccoli, and rice, the kind of balanced meal Catherine had always insisted upon. "We're not getting any younger, Robert," she'd say. "We need to take care of ourselves." I set the table for one, as I had for the past 8 years, and ate while reading the newspaper. After dinner, I called my old friend Jack, who had lost his wife just a year after Catherine passed. We'd taken to checking in on each other weekly. So Margaret finally called. I told him after we'd discussed his grandson's football game and his recent knee trouble. "Let me guess," Jack said dryly. "She needs money." I sighed. $20,000 for Emma's study abroad program. "That's a hefty sum," Jack replied. "Are you going to give it to her?" "I don't know." I rubbed my temples. "It's for Emma, and you know I'd do anything for that girl." But Margaret didn't even call on my birthday last month. Not a call, not a text. Nothing. The hurt in my voice surprised me. I thought I'd made peace with Margaret's emotional distance. "And now she wants 20 grand, Jack said, cutting to the heart of the matter as he always did. "Exactly. Well, what would Catherine say?" It was the question I'd been asking myself all evening. Catherine had been the emotional compass of our family, the one who could always distinguish between enabling and supporting, between generosity and martyrdom. She'd probably tell me to help Emma but not to let Margaret off the hook for how she's been treating me, I admitted. Sounds about right, Jack agreed. Catherine never did let anyone get away with bad behavior, not even Margaret. After we hung up, I went to bed, but sleep eluded me. I kept thinking about Margaret as a little girl, holding my hand as we walked to the neighborhood park, her small voice chattering away about butterflies and cloud shapes. When had that connection fractured? Was it when she left for college? When she married Tom, who always seemed slightly impatient with family gatherings? Or was it more gradual, a slow drifting apart as her life filled with career ambitions and parenting responsibilities? The next morning, I drove to the cemetery where Catherine was buried. I didn't go as often as I should, but today I needed her wisdom more than ever. Her headstone was simple gray granite with her name, the dates of her birth and death, and the words beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. I'd chosen the epitaph, though Margaret had pushed for something more elaborate. She would have hated anything fussy, I'd told our daughter firmly, one of the few times I'd directly contradicted her after Catherine's death. I sat on the small bench I'd installed next to the grave, watching the morning light filter through the trees. I miss you, Cat, I said softly, using the nickname only I had ever called her. I could really use your advice right now. No divine wisdom descended, no ghostly voice offered guidance. Just the rustling of leaves and distant traffic. But sitting there in the quiet morning, I felt my thoughts begin to clarify. Catherine wouldn't want me to use money as punishment, but she also wouldn't want me to be taken for granted by our daughter. On the drive home, I made a decision. I would help Emma, but not in the way Margaret expected. When I called Margaret that afternoon, she answered on the first ring. Dad, hi. Have you had a chance to think about what we discussed? I have, I said, pulling into my driveway. I've decided I want to help Emma with this opportunity. Oh, that's wonderful. Relief flooded her voice. I can send you the wire information for the program, or if you prefer to write a check. I'm not sending you the money, Margaret, I interrupted gently. I'm going to set up a special account for Emma. The program can bill it directly for her tuition and housing. And I'll give her a monthly stipend for her other expenses while she's in London. There was a pause. Dad, that's not necessary. We can manage the funds. I'm sure you can, I said. But this is how I want to do it. It's important to me that Emma understands this is a gift from her grandfather, not just an anonymous contribution to her education. Are you implying that I wouldn't have told her it came from you? Margaret's voice had that tight quality it got when she was trying to control her anger. Not at all. But this way, I get to be part of her experience. I want her to send me photos, to call and tell me about her classes. To know that her grandpa is invested in her success, literally and figuratively. Another silence, longer this time. I could almost hear Margaret calculating whether it was worth arguing or if she should just accept my terms to get the financial help. Fine, she finally said. I'll have Emma call you to discuss the details. I'd like that, I replied. And Margaret? I missed hearing from you on my birthday. The words hung between us, simple and unaccusing, yet heavy with everything unsaid. Dad, she stopped, then started again. I'm sorry. Work has been incredibly demanding, and with Emma's college applications and everything else. I just lost track. It wasn't a very good excuse, and we both knew it. Birthdays went into calendars, phones had reminders, and 70 was not just any birthday. I understand busy, I said quietly. I was busy too, when you were growing up. But I never missed your birthday, Margaret. Not once in 45 years. That's not fair, she said, her voice rising slightly. You're making this about one forgotten birthday when I'm trying to secure my daughter's future. Is that what you're doing? I asked. Or are you calling your father after 3 months of silence because you need money? The question landed like a stone dropping into still water. I had never been so direct with Margaret before, had always stepped carefully around her sensitivities, her defenses. I can't believe you would say that to me, she whispered. After everything what, Margaret? I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. After I paid for your college? Your wedding? The down payment on your first house? The private elementary school for Emma when Tom lost his job? Yes, after all that, I'm still your father, not your bank. I heard her sharp intake of breath and immediately regretted the harshness of my words. This wasn't how Catherine would have handled it. She would have been firm but loving, clear but kind. I'm sorry, I said, softening my tone. I didn't mean it to come out that way. I just miss you, Margaret. I miss being part of your life beyond financial emergencies. I miss my daughter. When she spoke again, her voice sounded smaller, younger somehow. I didn't realize you felt that way. How could you know? We barely talk anymore. There was a long pause, and then, unexpectedly, a muffled sound that might have been a sob. Dad, she stopped, and I could hear her taking a deep breath. You're right. I've been terrible. And not just about the birthday. About everything. It was the last thing I'd expected to hear. Margaret didn't apologize easily, another trait she'd inherited from me rather than her mother. It's been easier to just not call, she continued. Because every time I think about calling, I feel guilty about how long it's been, and then I put it off even longer. It's a horrible cycle. I understand that, I said gently. But I'm still here, Margaret. I'm not going anywhere. Even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. At 70, time wasn't on my side. Catherine's death had taught us both how quickly everything could change. Can we start over? Margaret asked. Not pretend everything's fine, but try to do better. I'd like that very much, I said, and meant it. We talked for nearly an hour after that, a real conversation that went beyond pleasantries and practical matters. She told me about her worries for Emma, about tensions in her marriage, about the partner track at her firm that seemed increasingly out of reach as younger attorneys were promoted around her. I shared updates about the house, about Jack's knee replacement, about the book club I'd joined at Catherine's insistence years ago and had continued attending even after her death. Small things, ordinary things, the threads of daily life that, woven together, create the fabric of a relationship. Before we hung up, we made a plan. Sunday dinners over video chat every week. A visit at Thanksgiving, her first in 3 years. And a promise for me to fly out to Chicago in the spring to see Emma graduate before she left for London. That evening, Emma called, her excitement about the London program bubbling through the phone. I explained my plan to support her studies directly, and she didn't seem troubled by the arrangement. That's actually really cool, Grandpa, she said. Mom said you want me to send you updates and stuff while I'm there? I'd love that, I told her. Your grandma and I always wanted to visit London. Now I can experience it through your eyes. I wish Grandma could see it too, Emma said softly. She'll be there in her own way, I assured her. Every time you notice something beautiful or interesting that she would have loved, that's her seeing it through you. Emma was quiet for a moment. Mom told me you guys had a good talk today. We did, I confirmed. She was crying afterward, Emma said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I haven't seen Mom cry since Grandma's funeral. I wasn't sure what to say to that. The image of my strong, composed daughter in tears was both painful and somehow hopeful. Sometimes, I finally said, we need to clear away old hurts before we can build something better. Like renovating a house, you have to strip away the damaged parts before you can fix them properly. Is that what you and Mom are doing? Renovating your relationship? Emma asked. We're trying, I said. It won't be perfect, but it's a start. After we hung up, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The maple tree stood silhouetted against the fading light, its branches reaching upward like outstretched arms. We're trying, Cat, I whispered to the evening air. We're finally trying. The next morning, I received a text from Margaret with a photo attached. It showed her as a little girl of about 7, sitting on my shoulders at a county fair, both of us laughing at something out of frame. Catherine must have taken the picture. The message read, "Found this while looking through old albums. I miss this. I miss you. Thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled, typed a reply with my still clumsy thumbs. Never have, never will. That's what fathers do. Then I opened my laptop and began researching the best way to set up an educational fund for Emma's London program. Not just because I wanted to help my granddaughter, but because in doing so on my own terms, I had finally found a way to help my daughter too. Not with just money, but with something far more valuable, the truth, spoken with love. As I worked, I glanced at Catherine's photo on my desk. Her eyes seemed to twinkle with approval, and I could almost hear her saying what she'd often told Margaret when she was young: "It's never too late to fix what's broken, especially when it's something worth saving." And our family, imperfect as it was, had always been worth saving. 3 weeks after that pivotal phone call, I found myself standing in Margaret's kitchen in Chicago, watching her fuss over a pot of chili. The visit wasn't planned, at least not by her. I had made my own arrangements, booking a flight in a nearby hotel without telling Margaret. When I called from O'Hare to let her know I was in town, her shock had been palpable. "Dad? You're here? In Chicago?" Her voice had pitched higher with each question. "Thought I'd surprise you," I'd said casually, as if flying halfway across the country at 70 was something I did regularly. "Hope that's all right." Now, as Margaret stirred the chili with unnecessary vigor, I could see the tension in her shoulders. The kitchen was modern, all gleaming stainless steel and granite countertops, nothing like my well-worn space back home. Photos on the refrigerator showed Emma through the years: soccer tournaments, dance recitals, high school graduation. I noted with a pang that there were no pictures of me, or of Catherine. "You didn't have to cook," I said, leaning against the counter. "We could have gone out." Margaret shook her head. "No, it's fine. This was already planned for tonight anyway. Tom will be home soon. He's surprised you're visiting." "I bet he is," I thought but didn't say. My son-in-law and I had maintained a polite but distant relationship over the years. He'd never been overtly rude, but I'd always sensed his impatience with family matters, his subtle eagerness to get back to his own interests whenever we visited. "How's the account setup going for Emma's program?" Margaret asked, changing the subject. "All taken care of," I replied. "The university has confirmed receipt of the funds for tuition and housing. I've also arranged for a monthly stipend to be deposited directly into a new account for Emma. She'll have enough for meals, transportation, books, and a bit extra for exploring the city." Margaret nodded, her back still to me. "That's very thorough. Thank you. I want her to enjoy the experience," I said simply. London was always on Catherine's bucket list, you know. She'd be thrilled that Emma's going. At the mention of her mother, Margaret's stirring faltered briefly. "She would have been," she agreed quietly. The front door opened, and I heard Emma's voice call out, "I'm home. Is that Grandpa's car in the driveway?" A moment later she bounded into the kitchen, her face lighting up when she saw me. At 18, she was the perfect blend of Margaret's features and Catherine's expressions, the same crinkle around the eyes when she smiled, the same tilt of the head when she was curious. "Grandpa." She threw her arms around me, and I held her tight, marveling at how tall she'd grown. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming? And missed the look on your face?" I chuckled. "Not a chance." Emma pulled back, her smile wide. "Are you here for long? Can we go to the Art Institute? There's this new exhibit I want to show you, and maybe we could—" "Emma," Margaret interrupted gently. "Let your grandfather breathe. He just got here." "It's fine," I assured her. "I'm here for a week, Emma. We'll have plenty of time." "A week?" Margaret's spoon clattered against the pot. "You didn't mention that on the phone." I met my daughter's gaze steadily. "I thought it would be nice to spend some real time together. Get to know Chicago a bit. See Emma's school before she graduates. Is that going to be a problem?" I could see the calculations running behind Margaret's eyes, work schedules, social commitments, the disruption to their routine. But Emma was watching expectantly, and Margaret managed a smile. No, of course not. It's just unexpected. The best visits often are, I replied. Tom arrived home shortly after, his surprise at finding me in his kitchen barely concealed behind a perfunctory handshake. Robert, good to see you. Margaret didn't mention you were planning a trip. It was spontaneous, I explained, noting how he immediately loosened his tie and reached for the scotch on the counter. I'm staying at the Marriott downtown, so I won't be underfoot. His relief was almost comical. Well, that's considerate. Dinner was a study in conversational navigation. Emma chattered excitedly about her plans for London, while Margaret asked carefully neutral questions about the house and my friends back home. Tom contributed occasional comments about work and the stock market, clearly making an effort despite his discomfort. I watched them all, these people who were my family yet felt like strangers in so many ways. There was a choreographed quality to their interactions, Tom and Margaret exchanging glances when Emma mentioned wanting to travel around Europe during breaks, Emma carefully avoiding certain topics that might trigger tension. I wondered how much of their real selves they showed each other daily. After dinner, Emma insisted on showing me her room, still decorated with vestiges of childhood alongside college acceptance letters and travel posters. On her desk sat a framed photo I hadn't seen before, Catherine holding infant Emma, with me standing beside them. Margaret must have been the one taking the picture. Mom gave me this last year, Emma said, following my gaze. Said she found it when she was cleaning out some old boxes. I touched the frame gently. Your grandmother adored you. I know, Emma said softly. I remember how she'd always have cookies waiting when we visited, and she'd let me help roll out the dough even though I made a huge mess. I smiled at the memory. Catherine had been remarkably patient with Emma's enthusiastic but chaotic baking assistance. She saved every picture you ever drew for her, you know. I still have them in a box in the attic. Emma's eyes widened. Really? Even the weird purple cat I made when I was 6? Especially that one, I laughed. She had it on the refrigerator for years. We spent the next hour looking through photos Emma had on her laptop, school projects, trips with friends, candid shots of Margaret at home that showed a more relaxed version of my daughter than the one I typically saw. In these images, Margaret looked more like the girl I remembered, with Catherine's laugh and unguarded smile. Later, when I returned to my hotel, I found myself unexpectedly emotional. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a photo I kept there, Catherine in our garden the summer before her diagnosis, sun hat tipped back, face turned toward the light. I'm trying, Cat, I whispered. But I don't know if it's too late. The next morning, I met Margaret at her office for lunch, my suggestion, which she'd accepted with surprise. The restaurant was sleek and expensive, full of business people in sharp suits conducting meetings over elaborate salads and mineral water. Margaret looked entirely in her element as she strode in, briefcase in hand, every inch the successful attorney. I stood to greet her, noting the subtle designer details of her outfit that would have been lost on me if Catherine hadn't educated me years ago. You look well, I said as we sat down. The firm must be treating you right. She smiled tightly. It's competitive, but I'm holding my own. I'm sure you are, I replied, remembering how tenacious she'd always been, even as a child. Once, when she was 9, she'd spent an entire weekend perfecting a science project after her teacher had given her a B+ instead of the A she'd expected. Catherine and I had watched, knowing better than to interfere with that determined focus. After we ordered, Margaret checked her watch discreetly. I've got a client meeting at 2, but we should have plenty of time. You know, the last time we had lunch, just the two of us, was the day before your mother's funeral, I said, surprising myself with the directness. You took me to that Italian place near the hospital. Margaret's composure faltered. I remember. You barely touched your food. Neither did you, I noted. We sat there pushing pasta around our plates, trying to figure out how to talk to each other without her as our translator. Dad, I'm not saying this to make you uncomfortable, I assured her. I'm just noting that we haven't made much effort to connect since then. And that's on both of us. She looked down at her water glass, tracing a finger through the condensation. It was easier to focus on practical things. The funeral arrangements, the will, the house. And then when those were settled, we ran out of business to discuss. I finished for her. And discovered we didn't know how to just be father and daughter anymore. Our salads arrived, providing a welcome pause in the conversation. Margaret took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, then set her fork down. Do you remember when I was in high school, and I wanted to quit the debate team? She asked suddenly. I nodded, surprised by the change in topic. You were frustrated because you kept getting assigned to argue positions you didn't believe in. And Mom told me I was being ridiculous, that the whole point was to learn to argue both sides skillfully, Margaret continued. We had a huge fight about it. I didn't speak to her for days. I remember, I said. Catherine and Margaret, both equally stubborn, had circled each other like wary cats that week. But you came to my room that night, Margaret said softly. You didn't tell me what to do. You just sat on the edge of my bed and said, sometimes the hardest arguments to make are the ones that go against our instincts. Those are the ones that teach us the most. I had forgotten that conversation entirely. Did it help? Margaret smiled. I stayed on the team. Won state finals that year arguing against standardized testing, which I actually supported. It taught me to see beyond my own perspective, a skill that served me well in law. Your mother would be proud of what you've accomplished, I said. Would she? Margaret's voice held a note of genuine uncertainty. Sometimes I wonder. She always talked about balance, about making time for things that matter. I haven't been great at that part. We all struggle with balance, I replied. Catherine made it look effortless, but it wasn't. She worked at it every day, choosing what mattered, letting go of what didn't. I miss her perspective, Margaret admitted. Especially now with Emma going off to college and then London. Mom would have known exactly what to say, what traditions to maintain, how to let go without losing connection. You know more than you think you do, I told her. I see Catherine in how you support Emma's independence while still worrying about her being an ocean away. That's pure Catherine. Margaret looked startled, as if she'd never considered the possibility that she might have absorbed her mother's wisdom without realizing it. When you called about Emma's program, I continued carefully, I reacted to more than just the request for money. I reacted to feeling like an ATM instead of a father. That wasn't entirely fair to you. No, you were right, Margaret said, meeting my gaze directly for perhaps the first time since Catherine's death. I've treated our relationship like a transaction for years. Call when I need something, send obligatory holiday cards, assume you'll always be there without putting in the effort to actually connect. Her honesty took my breath away. We can do better, I said simply. Starting now, she asked. Starting now, I confirmed. The rest of the lunch passed in a strange, new honesty. Margaret told me about her frustrations at work, being passed over for partner again despite bringing in more clients than colleagues who had been promoted. She admitted that her marriage to Tom had become more functional than passionate, centered around Emma and their careers rather than each other. I shared my own struggles, the loneliness that sometimes felt overwhelming, the house that was both comfort and burden, my fear of becoming dependent as I aged. We talked about Emma's future, about how different her opportunities were from what Margaret had faced at the same age. When the check came, we both reached for it. My treat, I insisted. You can get it next time. Next time, Margaret repeated, as if testing the concept. I'd like that. The rest of my visit unfolded in unexpected ways. Emma took me to her campus, proudly showing off the political science department where she'd spent most of her undergraduate years. This is where I decided I wanted to work in international relations, she explained as we walked through a hallway lined with photos of alumni who had gone on to diplomatic careers. Not following your mom into law? I asked. Emma shook her head. I want to build bridges between countries, not argue cases. Mom was disappointed at first, but she's come around. I thought of Margaret at 18, announcing she wanted to be a corporate attorney despite Catherine's gentle suggestions about public interest law. The cycle of parental hopes being reshaped by children's choices continued. On Thursday evening, Tom surprised us all by suggesting we attend a symphony performance at the Chicago Symphony Center. Robert mentioned enjoying classical music at dinner the other night, he explained with an awkward shrug. I had a client offer these tickets, and I thought. It was perhaps the first genuinely thoughtful gesture he'd ever extended to me. The performance was magnificent, Dvorak's New World Symphony, which had been one of Catherine's favorites. Sitting there in the darkened concert hall, with Margaret on one side and Emma on the other, I felt Catherine's absence acutely but also her lingering presence in the three of us, together. On my last evening in Chicago, Margaret and I sat on their back patio after Emma and Tom had gone to bed. The night was cool but not uncomfortable, the sky clear enough to see a few stars despite the city lights. I've been thinking, Margaret said, swirling the wine in her glass. What if you came to London with us when we drop Emma off in September? We could make a family trip of it, see the sights, help her get settled, maybe even travel a bit afterward. I stared at her, wondering if I'd misheard. You want me to come along? She nodded. Emma would love it. And honestly, I would too. Mom always wanted to see London. It feels right that you should be there. The invitation hung between us, weighted with possibilities and unspoken apologies. I'd like that very much, I finally said. Margaret smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Good. It's settled then. We sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the distant sounds of the city. Dad? Margaret said eventually. I really am sorry about your birthday. Not just forgetting it, but all the birthdays and holidays where I did the bare minimum. You deserved better. We all do things we regret, I replied. The question is what we do next. She reached over and placed her hand on mine, the first time she'd initiated physical contact since her mother's funeral. Next, we do better. The morning I left, all three of them came to the airport to see me off, an unnecessary courtesy that touched me deeply. Emma hugged me fiercely. See you soon, Grandpa. I'll call you next week about London plans. Tom shook my hand with newfound respect. Safe travels, Robert. Our door is always open. Margaret walked me to the security line, hesitated, then pulled me into an embrace. Thank you for coming, she whispered. And for not giving up on me. Never, I promised, echoing what I'd texted her weeks earlier. That's what fathers do. On the flight home, I watched the clouds below and thought about the strange, winding path that had led us here. A forgotten birthday, a request for money, my unexpected refusal to simply write a check, these small moments had somehow cracked open a door that had been closed for years. As the plane descended toward home, I found myself smiling. Catherine would have appreciated the irony, that after years of giving Margaret everything she asked for, it was saying no that had finally brought us back together. The summer passed in a flurry of preparations. Emma called me weekly with updates about her London plans, the courses she'd selected, the tiny flat she'd share with another American student, the museums and landmarks she couldn't wait to explore. Each conversation filled in another piece of the connection we were rebuilding, not just with Emma but with Margaret too. My daughter began calling more regularly, sometimes with practical questions about Emma's program or our upcoming trip, but increasingly just to talk. We developed a Sunday evening ritual. I'd settle into my armchair with a cup of tea, she'd curl up on her couch with a glass of wine, and we'd share the details of our weeks. Small things, ordinary things, the very conversations we'd missed for years. I started cleaning out the garage last weekend, I told her during one such call in late July. Found those old camping supplies we used at Lake Michigan when you were 12. The summer I caught that enormous bass. Margaret laughed. Mom was so proud she made me pose for about 50 photos. 57, I corrected with a smile. I counted when I digitized them last year. Your face gets progressively more annoyed in each one. I just wanted to go swimming. Margaret protested. But Mom kept saying, "One more, just one more. Your father will never believe the size of this thing." She was right. I didn't believe it until I saw the photos. The memory was so vivid, Catherine's delighted laughter, Margaret's mix of pride and impatience, the golden late afternoon sun on the lake. I found the fishing rods too. Still in decent shape. "You should keep those for when Emma has kids," Margaret said, then added more softly, "You'd make a wonderful great-grandfather." The comment caught me off guard. For years, we'd barely acknowledged the passage of time or the changing seasons of our lives. Now here was Margaret, casually referencing a future where her daughter would have children of her own, and where I would still be a vital part of the family. "That's assuming Emma wants children," I said, recovering. "The world's different now. Young people have more options." "True," Margaret agreed. "But if she does, I hope they have your patience." And Mom's laugh. "And your determination," I added. "Heaven help their teachers if they do." We chuckled together, the sound bridging the physical distance between Chicago and my quiet living room. "Dad?" Margaret's voice turned more serious. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." "What's that?" "I've been seeing a therapist since your visit. It's been helpful. Made me realize some things about myself. About us." I waited, giving her space to continue at her own pace. "The therapist asked why I stopped calling regularly after Mom died," Margaret said slowly. "At first, I gave all the usual excuses, busy with work, raising Emma, the distance. But she kept pushing, and eventually I admitted something I hadn't even acknowledged to myself." "What was that?" I asked gently. "That every time I talked to you, I was reminded that Mom wasn't there anymore. That our family would never be whole again." Her voice caught. "And instead of facing that grief, I just avoided it. Avoided you. It was easier than feeling the loss every time we spoke." The admission hung in the air between us, honest and painful and necessary. "I understand," I said finally. "When you were little, you used to hide under your bed when you were upset. Catherine always said you needed space to process your feelings before you could talk about them. I'm still doing that, aren't I?" Margaret said ruefully. "Hiding under the metaphorical bed. Only this time, I've been hiding for 8 years. Grief doesn't follow a timetable," I replied. "And Catherine's death hit you differently than it hit me. I lost my wife, my partner. You lost your mother, your future. All the moments she would have been part of, Emma's graduation, your career milestones, holidays, everything. I never thought about it that way," Margaret admitted. "That we were grieving different losses. Your mother would have understood," I assured her. "She always said you and she were two alike, both trying to be strong all the time, both terrible at asking for help." Margaret laughed softly. "She wasn't wrong. Remember when I broke my ankle senior year and still insisted on going to school the next day? Catherine was furious, I recalled. She said you'd inherited all my stubborn genes and none of her sensible ones. She drove to school and physically removed me from AP Calculus," Margaret added. Mortifying at 17, but I see her point now. After we hung up, I sat for a long time looking at Catherine's photo on the mantel. "She's finding her way back," I told the smiling image. "Just like you always said she would." The weekend before our London trip, I invited Jack over to help me prepare the house for my extended absence. At 70, leaving home for 3 weeks required more planning than it once had. "You're really doing this?" Jack asked as he helped me install light timers in the living room. "Flying across the ocean with your daughter and son-in-law?" "Seems that way," I replied, testing the timer settings. "Trust me, I'm as surprised as you are." Jack shook his head in amazement. "And to think, this all started because Margaret forgot your birthday and then asked for 20 grand. Maybe I should try that with my kids." I chuckled. "I wouldn't recommend it as a family therapy technique." Still, Jack persisted, "Aren't you worried it's all just temporary? That once Emma's settled in London, things will go back to how they were?" The question had occurred to me too, in quiet moments of doubt. Maybe, I admitted. But I'd rather have these months of connection, this trip together, even if it doesn't last, than never have tried at all. Jack nodded thoughtfully. Catherine would be proud of you, you know. She always said you were too willing to keep the peace at any cost. Did she? This was news to me. Oh yeah. She told Mary once that you'd rather eat glass than create conflict, especially with Margaret. Jack smiled at the memory of his late wife and mine, friends for nearly 40 years. Said it was sweet but not always helpful. I considered this as we moved to the kitchen to install the next timer. Catherine had indeed been the one who usually addressed problems head-on, while I tended to accommodate, to smooth things over. Perhaps my refusal to simply write the check for Emma's program had been more in Catherine's style than my own. I miss her perspective, I said quietly. Especially now. She's still guiding you, Jack replied with unexpected gentleness. Through Emma, through the memories, through the changes you're making. Catherine was never one to leave a job half-finished. The day we left for London dawned clear and crisp, that perfect September weather that had always been Catherine's favorite. I'd stayed overnight at Margaret and Tom's house to make the early morning trip to O'Hare easier. The guest room was meticulously prepared, fresh towels, a carafe of water on the nightstand, even a small vase of late summer dahlias that I suspected Emma had arranged. Ready for the adventure, Dad? Margaret asked as she helped me load my suitcase into Tom's SUV. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, double-checking my passport for perhaps the 10th time that morning. Emma bounced with excitement in the back seat, her enthusiasm infectious. I can't believe we're actually doing this. Grandpa's first international trip in how long? 25 years, I supplied. Your grandmother and I went to Italy for our 40th anniversary. Mom showed me those pictures, Emma said. Grandma looked so beautiful in that red dress by the Trevi fountain. I smiled at the memory. Catherine had bought that dress on impulse in a small shop in Rome, declaring it entirely impractical but absolutely necessary. She'd worn it to dinner that night, her silver hair gleaming in the candlelight, more lovely to me than when we'd met 50 years earlier. The flight was long but not as uncomfortable as I'd feared. Margaret had splurged on premium economy seats, insisting when I tried to reimburse her, "You're financing Emma's entire year abroad. The least we can do is make sure you don't suffer in coach for 9 hours." Tom surprised me by being a thoughtful travel companion, offering me the window seat, making sure I had water during the flight, and helping me navigate the entertainment system when I couldn't figure out how to adjust the volume on the movie I'd selected. Catherine loved old films, he commented when he saw I was watching Roman Holiday. She made us watch Casablanca at your house that Christmas when Emma was about 10. You remember that? I asked, genuinely surprised. Tom nodded. She had strong opinions about why it was superior to modern romantic movies. Very persuasive. That was Catherine, I agreed. When she believed in something, you couldn't help but see her point. Margaret's the same way, Tom said with a small smile. Though don't tell her I said so. She hates being compared to her mother, even when it's a compliment. It was perhaps the most personal conversation Tom and I had ever had. I found myself wondering how much I'd misjudged him over the years, seeing only his reserve without recognizing what might lie beneath it. London welcomed us with traditional English weather, a light drizzle falling from pearl-grey skies as we emerged from Heathrow. The cab ride to our hotel took us past landmarks I'd only seen in movies and documentaries, the Thames, Big Ben, Westminster Abbey. Emma pressed her face against the window, pointing out sights she recognized from her research. There's where I'll be taking my international relations seminar, she said as we passed a stately building with columns. And just 2 blocks that way is the flat I'll be sharing with Madison. It seems very urban, I commented, noting the crowds and traffic. That's why I love it, Emma replied enthusiastically. It's alive, Grandpa. Not like our suburb where nothing ever happens. Margaret caught my eye from the opposite seat, a wry smile playing at her lips. She'd had the same reaction to her first visit to New York as a teenager, that exhilarating discovery of a world where everything moved faster, burned brighter, demanded more. I'd been terrified she'd never come back to our quiet Midwestern town. She hadn't, not really, choosing Chicago after law school instead of the local practice Catherine and I had hoped she might join. Now, watching Emma's excitement, I wondered if it was a pattern repeating or simply the natural order of things, each generation venturing further from home, expanding their horizons beyond what their parents had known or imagined. The hotel was elegant but not ostentatious, situated in South Kensington near the museums and Hyde Park. We had adjoining rooms, one for me, one for the other three. After freshening up, we ventured out despite our jet lag, determined to make the most of our first day. Mom would have loved this, Margaret said quietly as we walked through Kensington Gardens, the late afternoon sun breaking through the clouds to gild the treetops. She always wanted to see the Peter Pan statue. She read you the book when you were 8, I recalled. You were convinced you could fly if you just believed hard enough. Margaret laughed. I jumped off the porch and sprained my ankle. Mom felt so guilty. Not guilty enough to stop you when you tried again from the lower step the next week, I pointed out. She said some lessons I had to learn for myself, Margaret replied. That second landing was much better. Emma, walking ahead with Tom, turned back to us. Are you two talking about the flying incident? Mom told me that story when I wanted to jump off the swing at full height. Did it work? I asked. The story, I mean. No, Emma grinned. I jumped anyway. But I landed better than Mom did, according to Grandma's version. We all laughed, and in that moment, Catherine seemed very present, in Emma's fearlessness, in Margaret's reminiscent smile, in my own heart that felt fuller than it had in years. The first few days in London passed in a whirlwind of sightseeing and practical preparations. We helped Emma move into her tiny flat, bought essentials at local shops, figured out the underground system, and located the nearest grocery stores and pharmacies. Between these necessary tasks, we visited the Tower of London, Westminster Abbey, and the British Museum. On our fourth evening, after Emma had met with her program coordinator and Tom had taken a work call, Margaret suggested she and I have dinner alone while the others ordered room service. I know just the place, she said, leading me to a small, atmospheric pub tucked down a side street near our hotel. The concierge recommended it, said it's been here since the 1700s and has the best steak and ale pie in London. The pub was warm and inviting, with dark wood paneling, soft lighting, and the pleasant hum of conversation. We settled into a corner booth, ordered our food, and fell into comfortable silence. What are you thinking? Margaret asked after a while, studying my face across the table. That your mother would have sketched this place, I replied honestly. She'd have had her notebook out already, capturing the bartender or those old beams in the ceiling. Margaret smiled. She never went anywhere without that sketchbook. I used to be so embarrassed when she'd pull it out in restaurants back home. Really? I didn't know that. Oh yes. Teenage mortification. Mom, people are staring, I'd hiss. And she'd just say, let them stare. Maybe they'll see something worth remembering, I finished, quoting Catherine's standard response. Exactly. Margaret took a sip of her wine. I wish I'd inherited her artistic talent. All I got was her stubbornness. And her compassion, I added. Her attention to detail. Her laugh. Margaret looked startled. You think I have Mom's laugh? Everyone always said I was all you, analytical, reserved. When you really laugh, not the polite social chuckle, but when something genuinely amuses you, you sound exactly like her, I told her. Emma has it too. It's like hearing an echo across generations. Our food arrived, hearty, traditional English fare that Catherine would have deemed properly substantial. As we ate, Margaret asked about my plans after our return. Jack mentioned you're thinking about joining that travel group for seniors? The one that does domestic trips? I nodded. Seemed like a good way to ease into traveling more. They're doing the national parks next spring, Yellowstone, Grand Teton, Glacier. That sounds wonderful, Margaret said sincerely. I've been worried about you being alone in that big house, especially in winter. I manage fine, I assured her, though the previous winter had been challenging. A heavy snowfall had left me effectively housebound for nearly a week, and shoveling the driveway had taken its toll on my aging back. Still, Margaret persisted, have you ever thought about alternatives? Not assisted living, she added quickly, seeing my expression. But maybe a condo in town? Or even, she hesitated, then continued more carefully, there are some nice senior communities near us in Chicago. Independent living, but with people around. Activities, classes. I set down my fork, surprised by the suggestion. You want me to move to Chicago? Only if you wanted to, she said. But yes, I've been thinking about it. Especially after these past few months. It would be nice to have you closer. The thought of leaving my house, the home Catherine and I had shared for over 40 years, had never seriously crossed my mind before. I looked at Margaret across the table, trying to process the invitation behind her words. Not just to relocate, but to re-enter her life on a permanent basis. You've caught me by surprise, I admitted. That's a big change to consider. I know, Margaret said quickly. And I'm not suggesting you decide right now. Just think about it. The winters are getting harder. The house requires so much maintenance. And, she hesitated, then finished softly, I'd like Emma to have more time with you when she's home from London. I'd like more time with you too. What about Tom? I asked. Has he weighed in on this idea? To my surprise, Margaret smiled. It was his suggestion, actually. After your visit in the spring. He said he'd never really gotten to know you properly, and that maybe it was time to change that. I sat back, genuinely astonished. Well, I'll certainly give it some thought. That's all I'm asking, Margaret replied, reaching across the table to touch my hand briefly. Now, about that sticky toffee pudding the next table ordered, doesn't that look amazing? We shifted to lighter topics, but the conversation stayed with me as we strolled back to the hotel through the lamplit London streets. The idea of leaving the house was both terrifying and strangely liberating. Every corner held memories of Catherine, yet perhaps that was part of the problem. I had enshrined her memories so completely that I'd almost stopped creating new memories of my own. The next day, Emma's program officially began with an orientation session. While she attended, the three of us explored the Victoria and Albert Museum, a place Catherine had specifically mentioned wanting to see someday. She would have spent days in here, I commented as we wandered through galleries of sculptures, textiles, and decorative arts. We should buy something for Emma from the gift shop, Margaret suggested. A little congratulations gift for her first day. As Margaret and Tom debated between a beautiful art book and an elegant scarf, I found myself drawn to a display of vintage-inspired jewelry. One piece in particular caught my eye, a silver pendant with a delicate rendering of London's skyline. That's lovely, said a voice at my elbow. I turned to find an elderly docent with bright eyes and a friendly smile. For someone special? My granddaughter, I replied. She's studying here for the year. How wonderful, the woman said. My granddaughter did the same, came from Australia to study at King's College. Now she lives here permanently. Married an Englishman. She laughed. Be careful, or yours might do the same. The thought had honestly never occurred to me. Emma, settling permanently in another country? It seemed impossible and yet entirely plausible given her interests in international relations. That would be quite a change for the family, I said. It was at first, the docent admitted. But then we started visiting more often. My husband and I even spent a summer here when he retired. Most valuable time of our lives, exploring a new place together after 50 years of marriage. She moved on to help another visitor, but her words lingered with me. When Catherine and I had discussed retirement, we'd had vague plans to travel more, to visit places we'd only read about. Her illness had ended those dreams abruptly. I'd never considered continuing them on my own. I purchased the pendant for Emma and rejoined Margaret and Tom, who had settled on the art book. As we left the museum, Tom surprised me by asking, have you given any thought to Margaret's suggestion? About relocating? Some, I admitted. It's a lot to consider. Tom nodded. For what it's worth, I think it would be good for Margaret. For all of us, really. Emma's leaving has been harder on her than she lets on. I studied him with new interest. I didn't realize you'd noticed. I'm not the most emotionally demonstrative person, Tom acknowledged wryly. But I do pay attention. Margaret needs more connection than I can provide sometimes. Having you nearby would help fill that gap. It was perhaps the most insightful and honest thing he'd ever said to me, an admission of both his limitations and his concern for his wife. I appreciate your candor, I told him. And you're welcome. That evening, we all had dinner with Emma at a small Italian restaurant near her flat. She was bubbling over with excitement about her program, the other students she'd met, and her plans for the coming weeks. One of my professors suggested we attend parliament sessions whenever possible, she explained between bites of pasta. To see democracy in action in a different system. Isn't that cool? Very educational, Margaret agreed. Just be sure to keep up with your actual coursework too. Obviously, Mom, Emma rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Oh, and there's a weekend trip to Edinburgh in October that some of us are planning. Scotland is supposed to be beautiful in the fall. As she chattered on, I found myself wondering about the docent's words. Would Emma fall in love with this place, with this life, enough to stay? And if she did, what would that mean for the rest of us? After dinner, Margaret and Tom headed back to the hotel, but Emma asked if I'd walk with her a bit longer. We strolled along the Thames embankment, the city lights reflecting in the dark water. I have something for you, I said, handing her the small gift bag from the museum. A little first-day present. Emma opened it eagerly, her face lighting up when she saw the pendant. Grandpa, it's beautiful. She immediately put it on, the silver catching the light from nearby lampposts. I'll wear it all the time. I thought it might remind you of this adventure, even years from now, I told her. It will, she promised. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she added, Can I ask you something? Anything. Were you scared? When you left home for college, I mean. Or when you started your first job. Did you ever feel like you might not be good enough? The vulnerability in her question caught me by surprise. Emma had always seemed so confident, so assured of her place in the world. Terrified, I admitted. I grew up on a farm, you know. Going to the state university felt like landing on another planet. I was sure everyone would figure out I didn't belong there. Really? She seemed genuinely shocked. But you're always so, together. I laughed. That came much later, I promise you. Those first few months at school, I called your great-grandmother every Sunday in tears, begging to come home. She never let me, of course. What changed? I stopped trying to pretend I knew everything, I said after considering the question. Started asking for help when I needed it. Made a few friends who felt just as lost as I did. Eventually, I realized that everyone, even the people who seemed most confident, was figuring it out as they went along. Emma nodded slowly. My roommate Madison seems so prepared for everything. Her parents both work for the UN. She grew up in like 5 different countries. And here I am from suburban Chicago, worried I'll say something stupid in class. Madison is probably looking at you thinking, Emma seems so together. I wish I had her confidence, I told her. You think so? I know so, I assured her. Your grandmother used to say that half of adulthood is realizing everyone else is faking it too, and the other half is being kind enough not to point it out. Emma laughed, the tension visibly easing from her shoulders. Grandma was smart. The smartest person I ever knew, I agreed. She'd be so proud of you right now, Emma. Taking this leap, embracing this adventure. Even though I'm scared? Especially because you're scared but doing it anyway. I put my arm around her shoulders as we walked. Courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about feeling it and moving forward regardless. We reached a bench overlooking the river and sat for a while, watching the boats pass by. The London Eye glowed in the distance, a perfect circle of light against the night sky. Mom says you're thinking about moving to Chicago, Emma said eventually. Is that true? She mentioned the possibility. I hedged. I'm considering it. I think it would be amazing, Emma said with unexpected enthusiasm. When I come home for breaks, we could do stuff together. And you could come to my graduation next year. I'd be at your graduation regardless, I pointed out. Yeah, but you wouldn't have to travel so far. And, she hesitated, then continued more softly, it would be nice knowing you and Mom were looking out for each other while I'm gone. I studied her face in the gentle glow of the streetlights. You worry about her, don't you? Emma nodded. She tries to hide it, but I know she's been struggling. With me leaving, with work stuff. She puts so much pressure on herself to be perfect all the time. She always has, I said. Even as a little girl. Mom never talks about when she was young, Emma commented. What was she like? I smiled, remembering Margaret at 6, 7, 12, 16, all the versions that had blended together into the woman she'd become. Determined. Whatever she set her mind to, she accomplished through sheer force of will. When she was 8, she decided she wanted to win the school spelling bee. She made your grandmother quiz her on words every night for 2 months straight. Never missed a single study session. Did she win? Emma asked. Second place, I chuckled. She was furious. Demanded we start preparing for the next year immediately. That time, she won. That sounds like Mom, Emma agreed. She still makes lists for everything. Some things never change, I said. But she was joyful too, especially when she was very young. She loved to dance in the rain. To climb trees higher than any of the neighborhood boys. To read books curled up in the window seat your grandmother insisted on when we renovated. Emma listened intently, as if piecing together a puzzle whose picture she'd never fully seen. I wish I could have known her then. In some ways, you're getting to know her now, I pointed out. The past few months, I've seen glimpses of the Margaret I remember, less guarded, more willing to connect. Since your birthday, Emma nodded. When she realized she'd hurt you. It wasn't just that, I said thoughtfully. I think it was realizing that time isn't infinite. That relationships need tending, like gardens. Neglect them too long, and you might not be able to bring them back. Emma fingered the pendant at her neck. Is that why you're considering the move? To tend the garden? I smiled at her perceptiveness. Partly. And partly because I'm 70 years old in a house built for a family of 4. It's a lot of empty space to rattle around in. But it's home, Emma said softly. Where you and Grandma lived. Yes, I acknowledged. But your grandmother was never particularly sentimental about physical places. She used to say, home is who you're with, not where you are. I think she'd approve of me going where family is. Emma leaned her head against my shoulder, a gesture so reminiscent of Margaret at her age that my heart constricted. I'm glad you came to London with us, Grandpa. So am I, sweetheart, I replied. So am I. The next day was Emma's first full day of classes. The 3 of us spent it doing the most quintessentially British activity we could think of, touring Buckingham Palace, watching the changing of the guard, and having afternoon tea at a hotel Margaret had researched extensively. These scones are heavenly, Tom declared, spreading one with clotted cream and jam. I may need to be rolled out of here. Save room, Margaret advised. There are still 3 tiers of this tower to get through. I watched them across the elegant table, their faces relaxed and happy in a way I hadn't seen in years. The strain that had sometimes shadowed their interactions seemed absent here, as if the distance from daily pressures had allowed them to rediscover each other. I've been thinking about what we discussed, I said, setting down my teacup. About the possibility of relocating to Chicago. Margaret looked up, instantly alert but trying not to appear too eager. Oh? I'd like to explore the option, I said carefully. See some of these communities you mentioned when we get back. Not making any promises, but I'm open to the idea. The smile that bloomed across Margaret's face was worth any uncertainty I felt. That's wonderful, Dad. we can set up some tours as soon as we're home. I still need to figure out what to do with the house, I cautioned. And 45 years of accumulated belongings. We'll help, Tom offered immediately. I can take some time off work. We can make a project of it, go through everything together. The thought of sorting through Catherine's things, the boxes of her clothes I still kept in the attic, her art supplies in the spare room, the books with her notes in the margins, had always seemed overwhelming. But with Margaret and Tom to help, perhaps it would be less a burial and more a celebration of what had been. I'd appreciate that, I said sincerely. As we left the hotel, Margaret linked her arm through mine, a gesture of affection she hadn't offered in years. Thank you for considering this, Dad. It means a lot to me. Well, as your mother would say, sometimes the best new chapters begin with turning the page on an old one, I replied. Our final days in London passed too quickly. We helped Emma fully settle into her flat, met her roommate Madison, who, as I'd predicted to Emma, seemed far less self-assured in person than in Emma's description, and visited the last few landmarks on our must-see list. The evening before our departure, Emma joined us for dinner at our hotel. She seemed more at ease now, excited rather than anxious about the year ahead. I applied for an internship at the American Embassy for next semester, she announced. My advisor says I have a good shot at it with my academic record. That's fantastic, Margaret exclaimed. Isn't that the kind of experience you wanted for your career path? Emma nodded. It would be amazing for my resume. And they sometimes offer full-time positions after graduation to their best interns. I caught the implication immediately. You're thinking you might want to stay in London after your program? Emma shrugged, trying to appear casual though her eyes betrayed her excitement. Maybe. Or somewhere in Europe. There are a lot of opportunities in my field over here. I glanced at Margaret, expecting to see dismay or at least concern. Instead, her expression was thoughtful, almost accepting. If that's what you want to pursue, we'll support you, she said after a moment. Though I hope you'd still come home for holidays. Emma beamed. Of course. And you guys could visit more often. Especially if Grandpa moves to Chicago, it's a direct flight from O'Hare to Heathrow. The easy way she incorporated my potential move into her future plans touched me deeply. For so long, I'd felt peripheral to their lives. Now I was being woven back into the fabric of their planning, their dreaming. After dinner, we walked Emma back to her flat, the four of us strolling through the London evening. The city had taken on a familiar comfort in the short time we'd been there, no longer foreign but simply new. Emma hugged each of us goodbye, Tom first, then Margaret who held her tightly and whispered something in her ear that made Emma smile, and finally me. I'll call you every week, she promised as she embraced me. And send lots of photos. I'll look forward to it, I told her. And remember what we talked about the other night. Everyone's figuring it out as they go along. Even the UN kids. She laughed. I will. Love you, Grandpa. Love you too, sweetheart, I replied, marveling at how easily those words came now, when they had once been so difficult to express. As we walked back to the hotel, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought us to this moment. A forgotten birthday, a request for money, my unexpected refusal, small turning points that had altered our family's trajectory. In my room that night, I called Jack to check in about the house and to share our adventures. Sounds like you've had quite the trip, he commented. And now you're thinking about selling the house? Moving to Chicago? That's a big step, Robert. It is, I agreed. But staying put is a choice too, you know. And maybe not the right one anymore. Catherine would be proud of you, Jack said. She always said you needed to take more chances. Did she now? I laughed. You and Catherine seem to have had a lot of conversations about my shortcomings that I never knew about. Not shortcomings, Jack corrected. Possibilities. She saw all the things you could be if you just got out of your own way. After we hung up, I stood at the hotel window looking out at the London night. Catherine had loved city lights, the way they transformed ordinary streets into something magical after dark. She would have been right beside me, pointing out architectural details, imagining the lives behind lit windows. "I think I'm finally getting out of my own way, Kat," I whispered to the glass. "Better late than never, right?" The flight home the next day was quieter than our journey over. Margaret worked on her laptop for part of the time, Tom read a thriller he'd bought at Heathrow, and I dozed intermittently, my thoughts drifting between the past and the possible future. When we landed in Chicago, Margaret insisted I come to their house rather than immediately catching my connecting flight home. "Stay the night," she urged. "You must be exhausted, and this way we can go over some of those community brochures I mentioned." Too tired to argue, I agreed. The house seemed emptier without Emma's vibrant presence, but also more peaceful somehow. Margaret had set up the guest room again, this time with a small vase of fresh flowers and a stack of glossy brochures on the nightstand. After a light dinner, we sat in their living room reviewing the options. The communities Margaret had researched were impressive, beautifully landscaped campuses with independent apartments, shared amenities, and various levels of available care if needed later. "This one is only 15 minutes from our house," Margaret pointed out, showing me pictures of a particularly attractive complex. "And they have a woodworking shop in their activity center." I remembered how you used to enjoy that. The thoughtfulness of that detail, that she had remembered a hobby I hadn't actively pursued in years, moved me unexpectedly. "You've put a lot of effort into this research," I observed. Margaret nodded. "I wanted you to have good options. To see that moving wouldn't mean giving up independence or the things you enjoy." We talked for over an hour, going through each brochure, discussing the pros and cons. By the time we finished, I had narrowed the options to 2 communities that seemed most appealing. "We could tour them next month when you come back for Thanksgiving," Margaret suggested. "No pressure to decide right away, but at least you'd have a better sense of what they're really like." "That sounds reasonable," I agreed. "And in the meantime, I can start going through things at the house. Deciding what to keep, what to let go." "I could come help for a weekend," Margaret offered. "Maybe take a Friday off work. We could start with Mom's art supplies. I know Emma would love to have some of her brushes and sketchbooks." The thought of Margaret helping to sort through Catherine's belongings, not as a duty but as a way of connecting with her mother's memory, was both painful and deeply right. "I'd like that," I said. The next morning, as Tom loaded my suitcase into the car for the drive to the airport, Margaret handed me a small gift bag. "What's this?" I asked. "Just a little something from London," she said. "Open it on the plane." At the departure gate, she hugged me tightly. "Call me when you get home safely," she instructed, just as Catherine always had when I traveled. "I will," I promised. "And Margaret? Thank you. For everything. Love you, Dad," she said simply, then turned to leave before I could see the tears in her eyes. On the plane, I opened the gift bag. Inside was a small, elegantly framed photograph, one I hadn't realized Margaret had taken during our trip. It showed Emma and me on the bench by the Thames, our profiles illuminated by the soft glow of the streetlight, both of us smiling at something beyond the frame. Tucked into the corner of the frame was a handwritten note, "To new beginnings. Love, Margaret." I traced the words with my fingertip, thinking of all that had changed since that forgotten birthday and unexpected phone call. The wounds that had begun to heal, the connections being rebuilt, the possibilities opening before us. As the plane lifted off, I looked out at the vast expanse of sky and felt not the weight of leaving but the lightness of moving forward. 70 years old, and somehow my story wasn't ending but beginning a new chapter, one filled with the family I had almost lost and now found again. Catherine had always believed that the most beautiful journeys were the unexpected ones. Sitting there with the photograph in my hands, I finally understood what she'd meant. Sometimes the detours, the mistakes, even the heartaches lead us exactly where we need to be. When my daughter forgot my 70th birthday but remembered to ask for $20,000 that same week, I could never have imagined it would lead to this moment of clarity and connection. I thought I was teaching her a lesson about respect and boundaries. Instead, we had both learned something far more valuable, that it's never too late to rebuild what matters most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.